Hello, everybody, and most welcome to the podcast. I'm sitting here together with Kalle Lundahl in Ekvena and Stockholm. Henrik is joining us from Stockholm, and everybody is most welcome. Today, we are going to talk about reflective consciousness. And I would start with a short introduction, and then you guys can come with questions. So we'll have an ongoing discussion about this. Richard E. Lind is the inventor of reflective consciousness. And he investigated a development in early Greek antiquity where the words and the showing for where the consciousness is was raised from being situated somewhere in the body, either the chest, sometimes it was denoted as the heart, and that thinking often or almost always was half physical, half psychological, as we would say in modern terms. They speak, for instance, about soma, the fluids in the body, and forces and such stuff. And later on, and this is the interesting part, this is the coming of the reflective consciousness. Somewhere on the line on this development, the consciousness raised from being in the body to go upwards and ending up in the head. And in this development, everything became more distant as well. All of a sudden, we started to get this new expression that we call today psychological, mental, spiritual, you name it. That is the development of the reflective consciousness. And also in this process, you notice a new thing, and that is that all of a sudden the bodily impressions is something that the psyche experience. No longer are they intimately connected. Instead, it's a psyche that has bodily experience. So it's an ownership of the experience, and it's a greater distance. And it's also in this period something that Richard E. Lind doesn't mention, but Ian McGilchrist, James James, and other people, this is the beginning of the idea of seeing, handling, being in contact, being in relationship with objects. And this is most interesting. It seems that at the same time, the development of the reflective consciousness starts. That's also the start of separable, individual, distinct objects apart from the so-called transcendental ego or reflective consciousness, the psyche, as the Greek themselves call it. And all of a sudden, you have this distinction between psyche and soma. And it's very interesting, the development, but we need to remember, as soon as we look at the distant time, like the time of the Iliad or the Odyssey, we are bound to put our expressions in the mouth of those people. And we need to look out for that, because we need to remember that's a later invention. We cannot say, yes, they had psychological experience and so forth. That's important to remember. So in a nutshell, with this short introduction, something new happened. It's a historical fact. Most people are agreeing on this, although they see it differently. But a new thing develops, and it's no longer in the body, wherever that is. It is somewhere else. It's in the head, and it's even not in the head. The head is more of a direction going away somewhere else, transcendental, if you want to. So I think that's the short introduction. Maybe some questions here, Henrik, Kalle?
I could add that when Jesus Christ speaks about evil thoughts, he does not say that they come in from the brain or something, but he says that they come in from the heart. And indeed, Plato, for instance, he speaks about the brain, as you told us, Hans. That's correct. So there is a difference, shift in thinking, so to say. To make a pun.
I was thinking, Kalle is very scholar when it comes to the Bible. Would you say that there's a development going from the Old Testament and somewhere in the New Testament towards this transcendentalism, or?
No. Because you have Jesus there, indeed, speaking about the heart.
And nothing from Paulus being, as he was a Greek, I take it, or am I out bicycling here?
No, he was. And so he had this Jewish learning.
You were muted there for a couple of seconds.
So Paul was a Pharisee, a former Pharisee, and he had both the Jewish and Greek learning. He wrote in Greek. But let's speak about this reflective consciousness. What is really? Is it? Do you think it's like that we are like robots, that we react in automatically on somewhere? For instance, if I punch Henrik in the face and if he falls down, is this an example of reflective consciousness? Is not your real being, or is it only a reflection?
Yeah, it's that's a very interesting question, and the reflective consciousness is actually the start of the idea of consciousness as reflecting the outside. Mm-hmm. So what's inside the head, I think Putnam calls that the bucket idea, and that the mind or the subject or the brain is just a storage for everything that's outside. Mm-hmm. So that's the mirroring. That's why he uses the idea of reflective. So there is an element of passivity that comes into the picture here. And of course, that's parallel to what Ian McGilchrist mentioned, and of course, Kalle and other people who are scholars in the antiquity know that there was a development, taking, for instance, metaphor from the theater, that we sit passively and see the play of life, so to speak. The word theory has its starts from theater, actually passively observing, not participating. And that's very interesting, because in my whole life, I had the perception that consciousness is something I don't know what it is, but it's sort of reflecting something. And this reflecting tendency, to use that term, or perceiving the consciousness to be that, it's new, rather new. It's a new development. And if you look in the literature about cognition and all that, you'll be very hard to find them not mentioning anything less reflective or mysterious. We don't know what it is. And I think the latest here was a podcast by Anneka Harris, the wife of Sam Harris. And she talked about the consciousness. She's very interested in those things. But it was always something reflecting something else, higher up. It's a higher thing.
So let's imagine that I have punched Henrik and he's laying on the ground, but that's not really Henrik himself, because his mind is somewhere
else. Yes, exactly.
So
he's unconscious. We say, yeah, very good, Kalle. I see what you mean now. Yeah, he's unconscious. His consciousness has left him. So the consciousness is not in the body, and one can see here this also enters the ideas of medicine. So we have a medicinal idea of the consciousness. We see the consciousness also from the outside in a way. I speak of other people's consciousness, and a very valid, I don't know if it's valid anymore after this podcast, but a very, very often asked question is, where is the consciousness situated? And that would not be a question before. Not at all. That would not exist.
Now it would be an object in that case, right? Consciousness.
It wouldn't be.
is not an
It
object.
wouldn't be question. It wouldn't be a question before.
I was thinking the first in the introduction, you said something about when we look at the details or something, we go up in the head or we go up in the reflective consciousness and we leave the body somehow, that we're no longer in the body. Was that misinterpretation or something? That
Yeah, you can
that when
see.
you are more in your body when you're not reflecting or something, I think you said.
No, but what happens is elevation of consciousness from a central point in the body going up in the head. So the consciousness is after that, you point with your finger to your head. And not to be forgotten, that's also the place of the eyes. And that's very important because in the same time period, the idea of seeing and visual changes also. And then we get this idea you see with your eyes. That was not existing before. And that's also a new tendency. And I think that's connected to the reflective consciousness. I think 99% of people now would say that imagery and visual, it starts with the eyes somewhere. But that was not the case before this progression. And it's very interesting. It's a little bit that this heightening, I say, elevation of consciousness from body to the head also reinforces the idea of the eyes as seeing. Before, one could say that the eyes were emitting something. They were directed somewhere. They were not seeing. Seeing was more like a thing you did. So it was nothing outside to perceive. You did something.
I think there was something you said in the beginning, like when we go into the details or something, when we say that, okay, these are the eyes seeing, we go into specific details, and then that is when we more or less leave the action and leave our bodies more or less and become passive observers or passive analyzing our thoughts or something on a meta level.
Yeah.
Was that something?
I wouldn't call it a meta level, but you can see it like this. Think about the box or the bucket that Putnam have. You own your experience after that development. Before you didn't own them. There were no experience to be owned. It were not experience you were distant to. You didn't put them into your memory bank and such stuff. People didn't have memory before. There was nothing to remember like that. If you remember, it was an action, nothing else, not taking out something from the box.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think when you are in handcraft or handicraft, you're sometimes your hands are just moving. They do it by themselves almost. You don't think about so much maybe what you're doing, but they act by themselves.
Well, you think about it, but you don't think about it in that way anymore. No. There are no objects. You think directly. You can say that maybe before they were thinking directly as thinking led to action, but all of a happenstance. Yeah, I think that was a good example when you speak about skill, doing things. Mm-hmm. You don't think about what you're doing as an object. You're thinking action. And I think everything they did before was like that. They were very, very conscious of their thinking. But nowadays, thinking is obscured somehow. You're not aware of your own thinking.
No, it's not bodily connected, I would say, almost. It's like you're leaving the bodily connection and you're most in your head or something.
Yeah. You could say that we have 70,000 thoughts, and most people today are not aware of them. They're only aware of a percentage. It would be very hard to think that the people of pre-antiquity would be unaware of their own thinking. That wouldn't exist before. So this unawareness, I would say, is pretty new then. So we don't see our thinking anymore. We see it as object, like little things, like things that we put in the bucket, and we don't know what's inside. The only thing we have is an etiquette.
Yeah.
Maybe this can help. Thinking is no longer penetrative. We don't see into the depths of thinking. We see it as superficial. Well, you can compare that to the body. Modern people, we have a body before they were a body. So having a body is like, I have a pain in my arm. It's distance from me. It's not my pain. It's the pain of the arm somehow. Of course, that is something we know now in pain research that makes the pain much stronger. Having the pain is stronger than being the pain, if you say that.
Yeah, so we moved from that the psyche owns the body.
Yeah.
Before then,
it owns the body and it owns its experiences, the pain, the joy, and that is reflected in the language. And that is what Richard Ealing is looking at. They have experience instead. They own their experience. And all of a sudden, this idea of this new memory, that's not an action. It's taking out things on the bucket and look at them from a distance.
Yeah, from a theater.
Not penetrating into them.
Yeah, it's a different relationship or occurring or something, a different relation to what the body is then, and
the body becomes a sort of a machine that the soul is driving. You can say that.
Yeah.
So,
and that is very common, I think, in all spirituality, that you have a soul or a spirit that inhabits the body, so to say, and owns the body, or is in charge of the body, right?
Well, maybe not before, but after that, I think that became the model for all Western thinking, in my idea. Richard Ealing doesn't go so far, but he doesn't investigate that. But I think that's the idea after that, that the psyche is something distant that only has the experience. And there's a big divide between body and soul as well. They're no longer connected. The soul is somewhere else. And nota bene, also the objects are somewhere else. The objects is, for instance, in Plato, they are in this worlds of idea, no longer in reality. There's something transcendental with the objects. So at the same time, and this is very important, I think, at the same time that the psyche becomes something transcendental and all that, also the world disappears. And that happens simultaneously at the same time in this period.
Yeah, you become the passive observer, so to speak, in a theater, something.
Yeah. So the objects do themselves, they do their own work, and we are not participating in that, we just see that happening. And of course, objects and subject are not the same, but one thing is that both become unreal in some aspects, become somewhere else. They're not, in a way, it could be good to think that the consciousness is not literally situated in the head, as head being a part of the body. It's somewhere else. And that makes it so interesting with this idea of vision, that vision becomes different. We see things all of a sudden. Before, vision was something we emitted from the eyes, something came out of the eyes. You can see at many paintings, drawing, carvings from Egyptians' time, from prehistoric time, and that what they continue to do in the East Asia, for instance. The eyes emitted something. They were not, how can I say, windows of the soul. They became windows of the soul after that. You know? And I can add one thing. I shouldn't be talking so much here, but I can add one thing. And I was discussing with somebody about visual imagery, and that person said, well, blind people don't have visual imagery. And I think that goes in hand about thinking that eyes give vision somehow. As a matter of fact, blind people have even more acute sense of vision than seeing people. So this whole idea that vision is connected to the eye somehow, it is very new and it's very interesting. It's almost another podcast, I would say. But it's very important to realize that blind people have even more vision than we. To put it crudely, you can't think without vision. It's impossible. And remember Barbara Tversky, Kalle just gave me a book. I've been spending most of the night reading it. It's called Mind in Motion. And a lot of experiment, you can see blind people using their hands, making visual things, making distances, relationship, above, under, all that. And so
how will we apply this idea that thinking is body, thinking is motion? What advice would we give to the reader or to the listener?
I would say that it becomes obvious when you read Richard E. Lind that any progress regarding the mental sphere must go with the same time as some bodily progress. You realize that, and I think that's important because that's also helpful. You realize that you need to do something with your body to be able to learn. After this development, when they separated the reflective consciousness from the body, the idea of learning without doing something with the body was obvious. Take only Socrates. His disciples didn't do anything, but just sitting passively listening to him. And that development is new. All learning before that was a bodily and spiritual action at the same time. And then you realize that you need to do something with your body, like develop your body somehow. Like we are doing yoga, we do meditation, we do Tai Chi, we do Qigong. And that has to be in parallel with the mental development. And then you understand that. Before that, you might do it, but you won't understand why. And that's a big difference. And that's why I think it's so important with this insight from Richard E. Lind. He realized that something happened historically, it hasn't been noticed before. And of course, he draws his own conclusion. He written a book. I think it's Christian, actually. And he says that can further spiritual development. I haven't read his book. I only read this article when he pinpoints this development in antiquity. That's so amazingly interesting. And remember, he wrote this before Ian McGilchrist, maybe simultaneously, but he came out with his things before the publication of The Master and His Emissary.
Yeah, there are so many depths in this discussion about consciousness.
Yeah, you really
we don't have the correct terminology almost, I think, in the West at least. Maybe in India and other, they have a more depth of and the widening of the terms. But
I can tell you, once you ask, they have a lot of terms. In Sanskrit, you have at least 200-300 terms for what we would call mental. Yeah. And in Western culture, there's only one expression, tops, but it's not very clear what it is. And we don't think about the mind, we don't talk about it, it's something obscure. And it's like this Aneka Harris. She just talks about it, like it is something and everybody knows it. I was actually thinking when she talked this about the box and the scarab, there you don't know what's inside.
But it becomes blurry because it's only one term then. I mean, it's only one term that becomes very blurred because it needs to be diversified into details.
Yeah, it needs to be opened up. And I think the term in itself, consciousness, when you use it, you block everything out. So I think a new set of terms are necessary. And that's what Heidegger did. He didn't use consciousness. That would have sent the reader off the wrong track directly, I think, because it's so associated with something reflective, something mystical, something you don't know about. And 99% of the population since this development are living their whole lives without ever pondering about what is consciousness. Descartes never did that. Neither did Hume. Well, Hume did it in a sort of manner. He went into psyche and he said, I can't find any I here. I can't find the subject. And when he did that, this is most interesting. When he did that, he was using this reflective consciousness. And of course, you can't see an I then. Everything is objects. So it's very interesting. Richard E. Lynn might be the first one to reach the goal of actually expressing this for the first time. And for me, it was such a revelation. And I don't make justice here talking about it. I slept like 1 hour last night, so my head is not clear.
All right.
But
I think we have to wrap it up here. I need to in a hurry. Do you have anything to add, Kalle?
No, we advise our listeners to develop the consciousness by perhaps doing yoga and memorizing things at the same time.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I don't know if this time, but Kalle and we invented the method of thinking, like memorizing things, repeating things, and at the same time do yoga. And that's taking the spiritual part and the body part, which is never separated in reality. It's always the same.
Thank you.
Okay.
Henrik.
This is most interesting, Henrik. Thank you for the subject. Very good, very good. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes.